You don't expect it to be your own sister. Not her. Not the one who used to braid your hair while humming silly songs. But there she was, raising her glass on my birthday, and slicing through my world in one breath. That night still lives in my skin. The soft clink of champagne flutes. The rosemary on the chicken. My name on the cake written in the same frosting my mom orders every year. Silver birch grill private room. Boston's cold had just begun to whisper under the coats. Tessa wore red. She always did. She said it made her feel alive. And I let her have that. I let her have a lot of things. She was glowing that night. Hair curled like she'd stepped out of a salon commercial. But her hands trembled. Just slightly. Just enough. Derek stood beside me with his usual polished grin. He kissed my forehead before raising his glass. To Adrienne, he said. To 35 and still the classiest woman in any room. Mom smiled like it was rehearsed. She always had a tone that could pin you down without ever raising her voice. She leaned over to whisper, "You should start thinking about freezing your eggs, sweetie. 35 is the new 40. I laughed. Soft, empty. Even that didn't surprise me. But Tessa's voice, that did. She cleared her throat, then stood. She didn't look at me. "I have an announcement," she said. Everyone turned. Even the waiter paused mid-step. "I'm pregnant." Just like that. A whisper tossed across the table like a feather. Mom gasped. Derek's hand froze mid-cut into his chicken. I didn't move. Tessa finally looked up, met my eyes, and smiled. "It's Derek's." A pause stretched so long it felt like the room tilted. The silverware stopped. The fire in the corner cracked louder than anyone breathed. I didn't cry, didn't shout. Didn't push back my chair or slap anyone like a movie would. I reached for my water, sipped. Let it wash the dry silence off my tongue. That was the moment I decided. Not tonight. Not like this. Mom looked between us like she wanted to rewind the night. "Tessa," she whispered, "this isn't the place." And then, as if I were the one disrupting the peace, she turned to me. "Adrienne, please don't create a scene." I smiled. And that smile wasn't new. I'd been practicing it for months. For years, maybe. "Scene," I said quietly. "Oh, Mom. I'm just getting started." Tessa sat down slowly. Her chair creaked like it felt guilt even if she didn't. Derek couldn't meet my eyes. For the first time in 8 years, he looked small. Like a man who realized too late that silence doesn't protect you. Funny how everyone else kept eating. Polite nibbles, nervous wine sips. I watched Tessa push her cocktail away. Untouched. That was my first real clue. She hadn't touched a drop all night. The waiter brought the cake. Vanilla almond, my favorite. "Happy birthday, Adrienne," written in pale blue. No one sang. Not really. Mom tried to light a candle, but it kept blowing out from the vent above us. I watched the wax melt sideways. "You going to make a wish?" she asked. I leaned forward, closed my eyes, and said nothing. Because wishes are for people who still believe they haven't been replaced. I didn't blow out the candle. I let it die on its own. Later, as we walked out to the parking lot, Derek reached for my arm. "Adrienne." That's all he got. I pulled my coat tighter. Kept walking. Some things don't need a scene. Some things deserve silence, sharp and steady as a blade. But I will say this I already knew. Long before the toast. Long before the dress shopping appointment she forgot. There were signs, a scent on his scarf, a text I wasn't meant to see. An extra toothbrush I didn't recognize. But I waited. Because sometimes, you need to let betrayal ripen so it collapses on its own. I had a plan. And Tessa had just walked right into it. If it were your sister, would you have said something or would you have waited? Until the silence could speak for you. It was quiet in the house. Not the kind of quiet you enjoy after a long day, but the kind that waits. Like something's holding its breath. I walked and dropped my keys into the bowl near the door and didn't even flinch when they missed. They clattered to the floor, echoing too loud for a Monday night. The birthday balloons were still floating half-deflated in the corner. One had slumped against the fireplace like it knew the party was over before it began. I slipped off my shoes. Careful. Slow. The way you do when you're not sure who you are in your own home anymore. The vase was still on the dining table. Glass. Sea green. A gift from Tessa last Christmas. She said it reminded her of Maine, our childhood summers. The salt air, the blue light. Funny, isn't it? How betrayal can sit right in the middle of your table for months. And only shatter when your hands finally stop pretending to hold it together. I didn't mean to knock it over. I just reached for my coat. The sleeve caught it. The sound it made was sharp and final. I didn't pick it up right away. I just stared at it. Shards in every direction. Like something had exploded from the inside, not outside. There was water too. Trailing off the edge of the table, sinking into the rug as if it were trying to disappear before I could notice. That was the moment I cried. Not at the restaurant, not when Tessa said it. Not even when Derek looked down and said nothing. But right then, staring at the broken vase, because I had loved that vase. Not for what it was, but for what it used to mean. Used to. I grabbed a towel. Kneeled. Wiped the water first. Then started picking up the glass with my hands. Piece by piece. Small to large. Careful not to cut myself. Some part of me still believed I could fix it. That if I collected every shard and arranged them just right, I'd have something whole again. But you can't glue water. And trust, once spilled, doesn't go back in the vase. I didn't call anyone that night. Not even my mother. Especially not her. Loretta had texted earlier, Tessa's young. Emotions run high. Let's not ruin a family over a moment. A moment. That wasn't a moment. That was a decision. A secret nurtured over time. Carefully hidden, not carelessly blurted. But she always did that. Made things smaller so no one had to be uncomfortable, especially Derek. He'd always been her favorite. Even before he was her son-in-law. Back when he was just the boy who fixed her gutters that one summer and charmed his way into every Sunday roast. I rinsed the last piece of glass, dried it, and placed it into a brown paper bag. I wasn't sure why I saved them. Maybe because I needed proof that something had broken. That it wasn't just in my head. The next morning I took a long shower. Too hot. Too long. I didn't scrub myself clean. I just stood there, letting the water hit places I couldn't feel anymore. When I came out, Derek was at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee like it was any other Tuesday. I said nothing. Neither did he. But then he slid a mug toward me. Cream. No sugar. Just the way I liked it. And for a second I hated how much he remembered. He leaned on the island, looking like he wanted to say something. But words take courage, and guilt doesn't know how to speak in the morning light. I didn't know she was gonna do that, he said finally. Not I'm sorry. Not, it wasn't true. Just that. I nodded. Not because I believed him, but because nodding was easier than screaming. Tessa's moving out, he added. As soon as she figures out everything. Is that what this is? I asked quietly. Just figuring things out. He didn't answer. I took the coffee, didn't drink it. Let it cool in my hands like a weight I didn't ask for. I didn't sleep with her to hurt you, he said. That was the wrong sentence. That was the kind of sentence people say when they want to sound like they had no choice. Like their mistakes were accidents, not maps they followed in the dark. I looked at him, really looked. He had shaved, pressed shirt. Eyes puffy from the night before, but still trying to be the man who keeps things together. You kissed me on the forehead, Derek, I said softly. Right before she made the announcement. He looked away. Was that pity, or habit? He didn't answer. Again. But silence tells the truth faster than words ever could. That afternoon I took the scarf out of its box. The one my mother gave me. The one with the tag still on it. Cream silk. Tiny stitched tulips in the corner. It was beautiful. And impersonal. Like most things Loretta gifted. I folded it back slowly, then tucked it deep into the drawer with the warranty manuals and old birthday cards, the place where things with no real use go to wait for meaning. Then I sat down at the dining table. The same one we picked together from a clearance sale in Somerville. The one where we argued over chairs, laughed over spilled wine, planned baby names that never got used. I ran my hand across the wood. Felt the faint groove where Derek once dropped a steak knife too hard. It was still there. A tiny scar in the varnish. Just like me. I opened my laptop, not out of habit but purpose. One by one I began changing passwords. Bank. Insurance. Shared calendar. All the invisible strings women hold without ever being thanked. Then I made a list. Not a revenge list, not yet, but a clarity list. Get copy of house deed. Pull tax records. Talk to Rachel at the firm discreetly. Check what's in the safe deposit box. My pen paused at the last one. The box. The one Derek never asked about because it wasn't a big deal. I looked up. The apartment was quiet, still smelled like lemon floor cleaner. But something had shifted. And this time I wasn't the one waiting for someone else to name it. Because if the woman you trusted most can look you in the eye and announce your husband's betrayal like a toast, then maybe you've been too quiet for too long. The vase broke. The cake was untouched. And the scarf never worn. All symbols. And now I was done collecting symbols. I was ready to start making moves. What would you do first? Cry, confront, or start writing things down like you're planning something nobody sees coming? Tessa once told me she was working with someone on interior upgrades. I thought she meant the kitchen. Maybe new tiles or better lighting. Turns out, she was remodeling her entire life. And not with Derek. I didn't plan to follow her. That's not something I normally do. But there are moments, quiet, still moments, when your gut whispers, something your brain can't explain. That morning, Tessa texted to say she had a quick checkup at the clinic. I was sitting by the window holding a lukewarm cup of chamomile, watching a single leaf spiral down outside. Something in me stood up before I even realized I'd made a decision. I grabbed my coat, keys. Didn't even finish my tea. I didn't go inside. I parked across the street behind a line of thinning oak trees. Boston in late November can feel like the end of everything, but that afternoon it was my certainty that froze over first. Tessa walked out of the clinic alone. She had the ultrasound envelope in her hand. Then a man stepped out after her. Not Derek. He wasn't taller, just younger. Wavy brown hair, well-fitted coat, and a way of looking at her that told me he wasn't just a driver. Tessa turned to him. And hugged him. It wasn't a friendly hug. It wasn't a thanks for the ride hug. It was something you give when your heart is tangled with someone else's. And when they pulled apart, his face worried, careful, familiar in a way that made my stomach turn. I didn't go home right away. I drove around Cambridge for almost an hour. No music. No calls. Just silence, and one question playing on repeat. If Derek isn't the father, then why did Tessa choose to ruin my birthday like that? Was it the truth she shared, or just the piece that caused the most damage? That night, I pulled out an honor days at Nan's N's old box of photos. It wasn't labeled. But I knew what I was looking for. Our last Christmas party at the house. The one where Tessa had shown up in that emerald dress, the one Mom said was too grown up for a sister. The one Derek kept staring at. I went through picture after picture. Some blurry. Some posed. Some painful even then. And there on the edge of a group shot near the fireplace was him. Just barely. Half a face. A hand on Tessa's shoulder. The same hand I saw at the clinic. He was never introduced. Never in the family group shots. But now looking back, he was always just out of frame. Always there. I didn't sleep that night. I wrote his name over and over in my notebook, Caleb Ortega. It took Naomi less than an hour to find his business listing. Interior designer. Owns a boutique firm in South Boston. Recently featured in a local magazine for a remodel in Beacon Hill. I emailed. Said I was interested in consultation. He replied within the hour. Polite. Professional. Oblivious. We met at a cafe across from Vertex Solutions the next afternoon. He wore the same coat. I arrived early. Ordered a plain latte but didn't touch it. When he walked in, his smile faltered just slightly. He recognized me, or at least the resemblance to Tessa. Adrienne, he asked. I nodded. He sat. His hands were steady but his eyes flickered. I didn't waste time. She's pregnant, I said. Did she tell you who the father is? He froze. Then blinked. She said she did IVF. That she was doing it alone. I slid a folder across the table. Inside a copy of the ultrasound with the date. And a blank paternity test consent form. I'm not here to accuse you, I said. But if that child is yours, you deserve to know, and so do I. His face, it crumpled not like guilt. Like betrayal. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear to you. She said she hadn't been with anyone else. I believed him. Because in that moment he looked exactly how I'd felt the night Tessa raised that glass. Caleb sat back in his chair staring at the paper like it was a test he'd never studied for. I'll sign it, he said finally. But not because I don't believe you. Because I need to believe myself. He pulled a pen from his coat pocket, the kind with a company logo, cheap and overused, and signed his name like it hurt to do it. I left the folder with him. He kept looking at the ultrasound like the grainy blur might talk back. As I stood to leave, he asked, will you tell her I know? I paused. I think she'll know. Soon enough. That night Naomi came over with takeout and a stack of folders. She didn't ask if I was okay. She knew I wasn't. Instead, she handed me a ginger ale and unboxed the spring rolls like we were in college again. I ran the scenario, she said, tapping her laptop. If the DNA confirms and he's the father, you're not just holding a truth, you're holding leverage. I looked at the corkboard we'd been quietly filling over the past week. Dates, receipts, photos from the party, a text from Tessa about the clinic schedule, Derek's calendar entry that didn't match. It looked like a conspiracy theory, but it was just the truth. I picked up the red marker. Circled one word on the paternity form. Truth. No more hiding behind politeness. No more smoothing over for family's sake. No more keeping peace when war had already been declared. I leaned back, looked at the mess of paper and ink and life. Then I smiled. Time to send out brunch invitations, I said. Naomi raised an eyebrow. You're really doing this? I nodded. I'm not going to scream. I'm not going to fight. I'm going to let the facts sit on the table like Sunday pastries. Let them try to chew on that. She leaned over, grinning. Remind me never to cross you. And as I lay in bed that night, watching the ceiling fan spin like time I couldn't get back, I wondered, what's worse? Being lied to, or realizing you let yourself believe it? Brunch in Boston isn't just eggs and coffee. It's a ritual. A power play. A polite battlefield disguised with linen napkins and sparkling mimosas. So when I sent out the invitations, handwritten, formal, and slightly old-fashioned, people noticed. Tessa replied first. A thumbs-up emoji. Then a second message almost too quickly. Just us girls, right? I didn't answer. Derek texted a day later. Looking forward to it. Do you need me to pick up anything? He'd always been good at sounding helpful. And Loretta. She called. Adrienne, her voice crisp, the kind that used to make me sit up straighter as a child. I assume there's a reason you've chosen the Elms for brunch. It's not exactly casual. I let the pause stretch. I just thought it'd be nice to treat everyone, I said. After all, it's been a season full of surprises. She hummed. That half approval, half suspicion kind of sound. Well, your father and I will be there. We never turned down a good Eggs Benedict. Neither of them asked who else was coming. No one did. Maybe that's what made it perfect. Naomi came by the night before. She brought her laptop, her suit, and that quiet fire I had come to count on. Final results came in this afternoon, she said, flipping open the file. I didn't move. She laid the paper on the table and tapped once. 99.97% probability. Caleb Ortega. Biological father. I exhaled so slowly it barely sounded like breath. Then nodded. Naomi poured me a glass of wine. You don't have to do this tomorrow. I looked at the corkboard one last time, cleaned up, now replaced by a single envelope sealed. I do, I said. But not for revenge. Just for clarity. The elms sat on the corner of Beacon and Clarendon, a quiet jewel of dark wood paneling and cream-colored tablecloths. A place where conversations were always private even when they weren't. I arrived 10 minutes early. They were already there. Tessa in pale yellow, her bump showing a little more than last week. Derek in soft navy. Handsome, well-groomed, looking like nothing had ever gone wrong. Loretta with her pearls. Always the pearls. No one asked why I had chosen this place. No one asked why now. Adrienne, Loretta said, standing just enough to brush her cheek against mine. You look rested. Tessa smiled politely. Her hands were folded neatly over her belly. Derek reached for my coat. Nice to see you, sweetheart. That word used to warm me. Now it just echoed. We ordered eggs, Florentine smoked salmon, fresh fruit. Derek picked a bottle of Prosecco. Tessa waved it off. Loretta sipped hers fast. So, she said, unfolding her napkin, how's work? I talked about a new client. Naomi had helped secure the contract. We discussed interior concepts, business growth. I let them talk too. Let Derek describe the latest architectural pitch. Let Tessa mention something vague about parenting classes. She avoided my eyes the whole time. The waiter brought the check. No need, I said. I've arranged for everything. They looked up. I also brought something for each of you. 3 envelopes, unmarked. Heavy with meaning. Tessa blinked. Derek tilted his head. Loretta set down her flute. I passed them out, slowly. Like I was dealing cards. They didn't open them right away. So I leaned back and said, You should. Tessa opened hers first, inside a copy of a paternity report. And a photo. Caleb holding a takeout cup with a hospital wristband in view. Tessa turned white. Loretta's brows creased. What's this? Derek had already opened his. Inside a printout of texts, his own. Dated. Time-stamped. To both me and Tessa, within 5 minutes of each other. And the last page, a notarized withdrawal from our joint IVF savings. Loretta gasped. Then she opened hers. Not medical, not emotional. Legal. The original deed of the house. The one she thought was a gift from Derek and me. Turns out it was just from me. And the note at the bottom, effective immediately, you are guests. Respectfully, Adrienne. No one spoke. For once, even Loretta had no words. I folded my napkin. Brunch was lovely, I said, and stood. They didn't follow. Outside the air was cool, my breath fogged slightly. It felt like I had just shed 20 pounds of silence. I didn't cry, didn't gloat, but I did feel clean. I walked 3 blocks before I let myself exhale. The wind picked up along Tremont Street. A man jogged past, earbuds in, oblivious to the emotional wreckage I just left behind. I kept walking. Naomi was waiting for me in the cafe near our office, tucked in a back corner like always, laptop open, chai, steaming, eyes sharp. You did it, she asked without looking up. I nodded. She closed the lid of her laptop. I've never seen you this calm after delivering an emotional grenade. I think I'm out of tears, I said. Or maybe I've just grown out of needing their approval. She studied me for a moment, then pushed a manila folder toward me. Here's the next step. Inside were papers. Legal motions. Quiet things with loud consequences. I would file for separation by end of week. Naomi added. They'll try to fight you. Derek's ego won't take this lying down. I'm counting on it, I said. We were quiet for a while. I used to think Tessa just envied me. I murmured, watching the steam rise from my cup. But it wasn't envy. It was entitlement. She wanted my life like it was a sweater she could borrow. Naomi reached for her phone. Need me to prep anything? No, I said. They've got enough reading material for today. She smiled, then paused. What now? I looked outside. The sky was overcast, soft like linen. But it wasn't heavy. I go home, I said. And I moved the bedroom to the guest room. The master suite doesn't feel like mine anymore. You're not leaving the house, why would I asked. I paid for it. That evening I folded Derek's clothes into storage boxes. I didn't burn them. Didn't slash or destroy. I wasn't here for drama. I was here for control. I left one tie draped over the arm of the chair. Let him wonder if I'd forgotten it. I moved the jewelry box to the living room and set up a daybed by the bay window. Little things. Quiet changes. No one would see them but me. And that was the point. I wasn't trying to make noise anymore. I was making space. The wedding registry went live on a Wednesday. It was Tessa who sent the link group text, no warning, just a little sparkle emoji and can't wait to celebrate with everyone. I was on my lunch break stirring butternut squash soup with one hand and tapping through my inbox with the other. When I saw it, the list was hosted on some luxury site. French linen sheets, a teak outdoor table, an espresso machine that cost more than my first car. I stopped scrolling when I saw the gold baby rattle. Not on the baby registry. On the wedding one. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't just tacky, it was pointed. Tessa wasn't hiding anymore. She was merging roles, bride, mother, heir, to a family narrative she'd rewritten in her favor, and Derek, he had added items too. I knew because of the notes beside some. We'll host Sunday dinners here, and Adrienne used to love this brand of wine glasses. They hadn't even scrubbed my name out of the picture, they just painted over it. I called Naomi. She answered on the first ring. I saw it, she said before I could speak. I want to crash the wedding. I said, half joking. Tempting, Naomi replied. But there's a better stage. Where? She was quiet for a second. Have you forgotten? They're having the bridal brunch at the museum. My breath caught. The same museum Derek and I donated to during our 5th anniversary. The same room where Tessa had her gallery internship. How poetic, I said. Naomi's voice was calm, deliberate. They've handed you the invitation. All you have to do is accept. I spent the afternoon going through my old photos. Not of Derek. Of Tessa. Birthday parties. Thanksgiving tables. That vacation in Martha's Vineyard when she was 19 and still unsure of herself. She used to look up to me like I hung the moon. Or maybe I just thought she did. It hit me then, maybe the betrayal wasn't sudden. Maybe it had always been growing quietly like mold under wallpaper. By the time you smell it, the damage is already done. That night, I pulled out the DNA results again. Caleb's name stared back at me. The test was indisputable. And yet, Derek was marrying her, claiming a child that wasn't his. Why? Image, pride, control, whatever the reason, they were selling a story. I just had to write the ending. The next morning I was at the museum before it opened. The events coordinator Gina still remembered me. She greeted me with that same tight smile she used to give when Derek arrived late to donor events. I heard about the brunch, I said. Her eyes narrowed. Yes. Tessa booked it weeks ago. She didn't say your sister. Just her name. Like she'd cut the thread that tied us. I'd like to make a small donation, I added, sliding an envelope across the counter. Gina hesitated, then opened it. Her brows lifted. Adrienne, I only ask for one thing. She leaned in. What's that? I want to speak. 5 minutes, no theatrics, just a toast. Her eyes flicked to the check again. She nodded once, almost reluctantly. Fine. You'll be listed on the program as a family contributor. Perfect. Back home, I called Caleb. He answered on speaker while pacing what sounded like an echoing apartment. She still hasn't told him, has she? I asked. No, he said. She swears it doesn't matter. That he loves the baby either way. And you? Silence. Then I don't want to cause trouble. But I also don't want my kid growing up not knowing the truth. Then you'll need to be there, I said. At the wedding. No, I replied. At the brunch. He exhaled slowly. I don't own a suit. You won't need one. Just bring your name. That evening, Naomi and I reviewed everything. The photos, the timeline, the DNA results. Even the note Tessa had once left in my apartment long ago thanking me for always making space for her. We laughed at the irony. She wanted your life, Naomi said, but forgot how heavy it was to carry. I ran my fingers along the edge of the envelope that held the DNA report. She thought it was a crown, I murmured. Not a weight. The week before the brunch, a package arrived at my door. No return label. Inside, a single item wrapped in white tissue. The silk scarf my mother gave me on my last birthday, the one Tessa had borrowed that night. Folded, pristine tag still attached. No note. Just the weight of its return. The morning of the brunch was cool and gray, the kind of weather that made you reach for a sweater even in early spring. I wore navy. Simple, clean, unassuming. Let them underestimate me. The museum's east atrium had been transformed into something soft and pink. Peonies, peach linens, little satin ribbons around each napkin. A framed photo of Tessa and Derek sat near the entrance, propped up beside a guest book labeled "A New Chapter Begins." Naomi met me by the sculpture garden entrance. She wore her sharpest blazer and carried the folder. Everything's here, she whispered. Photos. The DNA report. And your speech. I won't need the speech, I said. Naomi raised an eyebrow. You sure? I smiled. I know it by heart. Guests milled around with mimosas and fruit skewers. The usual crowd of Derek's colleagues, my mother's neighbors, and Tessa's friends from her yoga group. Tessa stood near the fountain glowing, hand on her belly like a medal she'd won. When she saw me, her face stiffened. Then she smiled, that practiced, polished smile. Adrienne, you came. I nodded. I never miss a family event. She looked over my shoulder. Where's Mom? Running late, but she'll be here. Tessa's hand fluttered down from her stomach. She was nervous. Good. Gina clinked her glass at 11:15. Thank you all for coming, she said. This brunch celebrates new beginnings and the love that carries us forward. She gestured to Tessa, who beamed. Then Gina added, before we continue, one of our family donors has a few words. I stepped forward. The room shifted. Chairs turned. Derek's eyes narrowed. Tessa froze, fork halfway to her mouth. Thank you, Gina, I began. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. When I first heard about this brunch, I thought, well, it's lovely, and a little ironic. Because new beginnings are often built on endings. I paused. I'm Adrienne, Tessa's sister, Derek's wife. A ripple moved through the room. I kept going. I brought a gift today. One that took a little time to prepare. From my purse, I pulled out a small envelope. I walked to Derek. Placed it on the table in front of him. Inside, you'll find a few documents. Photos. A DNA test. He didn't touch it. Tessa's face was ash. I'm not here to cause a scene, I said, turning back to the room. I just believe the truth should never be the last guest to arrive. And with that, I turned. Walked out. Left the museum behind me. Left them with the truth. And with each step, I felt lighter. Not triumphant. Not bitter. Just free. I never knew silence could feel this loud. Not until I sent the invitations. They were white. Thick cardstock. Embossed lettering. Know you're invited, or please RSVP. Just a name, a time, a place. Brunch at Vesper Hall Sunday at 11. Business casual. Family only. I sent one to Tessa's condo. I sent one to Derek's office. One slid under Mom's front door. And the last, the very last, I hand-delivered. To Caleb Ortega. He opened the door with a baby burp cloth slung over his shoulder. Eyes bloodshot, hands calloused from late-night bottle warmings. He didn't say anything at first. Just looked at me like I was the ghost of a chapter he hadn't finished reading. I just want the truth in the same room, I said. That's all. Then I walked away. Naomi thought I was being too kind. Justice doesn't wait for tea and scones, she said. But I wasn't serving justice. I was serving memory. And memory tastes better when the guilty are still pretending they're innocent. Vesper Hall smelled like rosemary scones and orange peel candles. The kind of place where wealthy mothers celebrate baby showers and executives close bonus deals. No one would suspect a war might begin there. The table had 6 seats, one too many. That was intentional. Tessa arrived first. Hair curled, belly prominent, smile brittle. She looked around confused. "This isn't Derek's birthday brunch," I didn't answer. Just poured her tea and watched her avoid eye contact. Then came Mom. Wearing pearls like armor. Eyes scanning the room like she was rehearsing disappointment. She kissed my cheek awkwardly and took the seat furthest from mine. Derek arrived next. Suit too pressed for a Sunday. He paused when he saw Tessa, paused longer when he saw me. Then Caleb walked in. He didn't belong here, not to them. But he was the only one who looked like he understood why he'd come. No one touched the quiche. The clinking of cutlery never came. Just the tension of 4 lives in orbit all circling one quiet truth. I cleared my throat. "Before we eat," I said, "there's something we should talk about." Tessa shifted. Derek's lips parted, a warning half formed. Mom's knuckles went white around her teacup. "And Caleb." He looked at me with quiet steadiness, like he'd been waiting for this moment longer than I had. I reached into my bag and placed something on the table. A single piece of paper. Folded, unfolded, DNA results. I didn't need to say anything. The words printed in black ink spoke louder than I ever could. Caleb is the biological father. No one moved at first. The paper just sat there. Like a 6th guest who'd finally opened their mouth. Tessa was the first to break. She laughed. "Sharp. Short. False. That's not Adrienne, you forged something, right? You always had a flair for dramatics." I didn't respond, not with words. I looked at Caleb. He picked up the paper. Held it like it was on fire. "Read it once. Then again." And when he exhaled, it was like he hadn't breathed in months. "I'm the father," he said. Quiet. Certain, broken. Tessa pushed back from the table so hard her chair nearly toppled. "I told you it was IVF," she snapped. "You were just a donor. It didn't mean anything." "You lied to me," he said. Not loud. Not angry. Just stunned. "I bought a crib last week," he added almost to himself. Derek's voice cut through the tension. "Enough," he said. "That test doesn't prove anything. You've been spiraling, Adrienne. Ever since that birthday dinner. This whole thing, you're humiliating yourself." Mom cleared her throat. "Let's all take a breath," she said. Her voice like varnish on old wood. "I'm still your mother. You don't need to make a circus of private matters." I finally looked at her. Really looked. "You taught me silence fixes things," I said. "But all it ever did was make room for more secrets." She blinked. Once. But didn't deny it. Derek stood, napkin still folded in his lap. "Let's go, Tessa." "Wait," Caleb said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. "This is her text from 3 months ago," he said, holding it up. "She said she loved me. That this baby changed everything." He placed the phone next to the DNA test. 2 pieces of proof, side by side. The table didn't lie, they did. Derek looked at Tessa, his jaw flexed. His fingers twitched, but he didn't say a word. He walked out. Didn't slam the door, didn't look back. Tessa stood there, left behind again. She turned to me. Eyes wide, voice small. "You ruined everything." I tilted my head. "No," I said. "I just stopped pretending." The cafe emptied out slowly. No shouting, no chaos. Just chairs scraping, boots stepping away, a bell chiming above the door. Only Caleb and I stayed behind. We didn't talk for a while. The server brought more water. Neither of us touched it. "I didn't know," he said finally. "She told me you were just her controlling sister. That you didn't want her to be happy." I nodded. She's good at that, I said. Twisting things until truth looks like jealousy. He folded the test results and tucked them into his jacket. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I looked out the window. The sun had started to rise a little higher. There were people walking dogs, carrying groceries, laughing into phones. You'll figure it out, I said. Start with honesty. That already puts you ahead of the rest. When I got home, the apartment felt different. Lighter. I sat at the kitchen counter and pulled out a photo of me and Tessa when we were little. Matching sweaters. Hot cocoa mustaches. No idea what we'd become. I thought about ripping it. I didn't. I just slid it into the drawer. Not ready to forgive. But done giving it power. Later that week, I sent out invitations. Not for revenge, not for another scene, just brunch. For real friends. People who showed up when things broke, not when cameras clicked. Caleb sent a message the next day. He asked if it was okay to bring someone. She's just a friend, he wrote. Helps me breathe better these days. I smiled. Bring her, I replied. No one should eat eggs alone. Tessa hasn't called since. Derek sent divorce papers through a lawyer I'd never met. And my mother. She sent a Christmas card. No note, just love, Loretta. It sat unopened on the mantel for a week before I tossed it. Some stories end with slammed doors or tearful apologies. Mine ends with something quieter. A morning. A mug of tea. And a piece that isn't loud but steady. I kept the scarf, by the way. The one she gave me on my birthday. I wear it on walks sometimes. It's soft. Warm. And I don't think of her when I do. I just think, maybe this is what starting over feels like. Sometimes the people closest to us hide the deepest betrayals. But healing doesn't always come with grand gestures or loud revenge. Sometimes it's found in quiet resolve. In drawing new lines. In choosing yourself finally, fully. And if you've ever been there, you know the strength it takes just to stand still. So, tell me, have you ever been forced to choose between truth and peace? Let us know in the comments. And if this story made you feel seen, don't forget to subscribe to EN True Tales. More voices like yours are waiting to be heard.